The moment I realized something was irreparably broken, the world tilted in a way that no one could see coming. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where sunlight slices lazily across the kitchen tiles. When I noticed my sister's absence where she was always present, at first I chalked it up to negligence, a careless mistake. But the missing heirloom, gone from its velvet case, polished and perfect just the night before, was a clarity I could not ignore. This was no accident, no thoughtless oversight. Her fingerprints lingered, both literal and metaphorical, on the betrayal that now burned in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I simply cataloged it in the deep recesses of my mind, letting each detail settle, preparing the moment when the scales would finally tip. The days that followed were quiet, but charged. I began noticing subtle manipulations I had once brushed aside, invitations I never received, whispered half-truths woven into conversations, and inexplicable absences that all pointed to one inescapable truth. She had been playing a game I hadn't realized existed. Yet she remained confident, perhaps too confident, as if the world owed her trust and I owed her ignorance. I smiled when she boasted of her cleverness, masking the storm gathering in me. I let her believe she was unchallenged, all the while tracing the invisible threads of her deceit. Each lie she told, each carefully choreographed charm, fed the strategy taking shape in my mind. Piece by piece, the puzzle revealed itself. Old messages resurfaced, innocuous at first glance but sinister under scrutiny. I recalled fleeting moments, a slight sneer when I mentioned the family fortune, a subtle glance that lingered too long, a story that never quite matched the facts. The pattern was undeniable. She had built her image with a precision meant to deceive, and in doing so, she left breadcrumbs that led me straight to her. I didn't rage, I catalogued. Every word, every act became a tool, a way to predict her next move. Her cruelty, hidden in plain sight, became the architecture of her own downfall. Whether she knew it or not, I watched and waited, my presence quiet, almost invisible, as I collected evidence without her knowledge. I returned calls with feigned indifference, laughed at her casual boasts, and nodded at the manipulations she believed would ensnare me. All the while I documented, photographed, and memorized. I created a ledger of indisputable proof, careful to leave no gap, no loophole for her to exploit. Anger simmered beneath the surface, a precise heat that sharpened every plan, every observation. I was not powerless. I was patient, and patience is a weapon far deadlier than fury. Her fatal mistake came as subtly as a sigh. Confidence, when unchecked, has a tendency to overreach. She flaunted her ill-gotten gains in front of witnesses she assumed were loyal, repeated lies in the presence of people she thought were naive. Each act of arrogance, each slip of tongue, fed the trap I had laid. I did nothing to accelerate her downfall, allowing her to cement her own ruin. It was in this self-satisfaction, in her unguarded moments of pride, that I knew the hour of reckoning was imminent. I had prepared for every contingency. She had prepared for none. Then the web I had so meticulously constructed began to tighten. A misplaced document here, a revealing conversation there, subtle nudges that exposed her network of deception. Slowly, inevitably, the illusion she had crafted unraveled. Friends once loyal to her, strangers with no stake, all witnessed fragments of the truth I revealed through careful timing and controlled disclosure. She realized the shift in power too late, the threads of her lies slipping through her fingers. Panic and disbelief flashed across her face when she understood that the tables had turned, that her intelligence and cunning, once formidable, had become liabilities in the hands of someone who had watched, waited, and planned. When the moment of justice arrived, it struck with undeniable force. Every betrayal she had sown, every act of greed, returned to her with precision. Her allies distanced themselves, witnesses of her duplicity and cunning finally free to speak. Evidence, once collected quietly in shadows, now formed a mosaic of her undoing. There was no dramatic confrontation, no scream-filled revelation, just the unassailable clarity of truth laid bare. She faced the consequences she had ignored, and the weight of her own arrogance crushed her with unerring justice. I revealed nothing overtly, only allowed the consequences to speak, and in that silence, her defeat was absolute. As the dust settled, I remained untouched by the chaos I had orchestrated. Stronger, steadier, and more assured, I stepped forward into a life reclaimed. The betrayal that had threatened to consume me now existed only as a lesson, a reminder of resilience and cunning. She was a cautionary tale, her ruin complete, while I embraced the future with a calm that no deceit could breach. Revenge had been mine, not in destruction alone, but in the quiet victory of rising above. And in that serenity, I discovered the truth every betrayed heart eventually learns. The most satisfying revenge is not in the fall of another, but in the unwavering strength with which you live your own life. The moment I uncovered the betrayal, a cold clarity settled over me. My sister's calculated theft wasn't a careless act born of impulse. It was deliberate, precise, and designed to wound. The realization hit harder than I anticipated, not because I hadn't suspected her tendencies before, but because the depth of her greed and arrogance had been masked by years of false charm. She had crossed a line that demanded more than confrontation. It demanded strategy, patience, and an unwavering resolve. I felt the sting of disbelief, but anger was carefully tucked away, replaced by a quiet, simmering determination that would guide every decision from that point onward. In the days that followed, I became an observer in my own home, noticing nuances in her behavior I had once dismissed. Small manipulations, like the casual redirection of attention from critical family matters, or the subtle guilt-tripping during casual conversations, revealed a long pattern of self-serving behavior. Each interaction was a thread, delicate yet telling, hinting at schemes far beyond what I had first imagined. She moved with overconfidence, believing every smile and every lie was unnoticed. I played along, a quiet spectator, cataloging her actions with careful attention, while allowing her arrogance to bloom unchallenged. As memories resurfaced, I traced the trajectory of years of rivalry, childhood squabbles, seemingly insignificant betrayals, petty deceptions. All revealed themselves in a new light. Jealousy had festered alongside entitlement, and subtle cruelty had been carefully masked by charm and laughter. Each flashback, once fleeting and dismissed, now formed a pattern of calculated exploitation. She had always measured herself against me, trying to outshine, outmaneuver, and outwit. The depth of her strategy became evident. This theft was only the culmination of a lifetime of careful positioning. Recognition of this pattern did not ignite immediate rage. It crystallized a deeper understanding of the battlefield I now faced. Despite the shock, I remained composed. My thoughts were precise, analytical, and deliberate. I dissected each action, conversation, and misstep with a strategist's eye, understanding that emotion, if uncontrolled, would be a liability. Every detail of her behavior became data, every word a potential key to unraveling her schemes. I resisted the urge to confront her directly, knowing that revelation too soon would compromise the advantage I was steadily building. In silence, I strengthened my mind, turning hurt into clarity and vulnerability into calculated control. Subtle signs that had previously escaped notice now revealed themselves as deliberate acts of deception. A casual misrepresentation here, a withheld truth there, and the recurring pattern of bending situations to her advantage formed a tangled web. Each piece fit together seamlessly, exposing a narrative of manipulation that had long gone unchecked. The clarity was intoxicating, not because of satisfaction, but because it illuminated the path forward, confirming that the foundation for decisive action was solid. I began recording each nuance meticulously, creating a map of her deceit with invisible ink, careful that she remained blissfully unaware. Quietly, I transformed observation into preparation. I documented financial discrepancies, traced misappropriated assets, and noted moments of emotional manipulation. Each recorded incident was a brick in the wall I was building around her, a silent fortress of proof designed to corner her without warning. I refrained from commentary, from accusation, maintaining an appearance of naivety while the architecture of her eventual downfall took shape. Patience became my ally, and the storm I intended to unleash was born in the shadows of careful planning. Her overconfidence became a weapon in my hands. She flaunted the gains she believed she had secured, boasting and manipulating as though the world owed her compliance. Each act of arrogance was a misstep, each assumption a crack in the armor she relied upon. I observed without interference, letting her convictions blind her to the quiet evidence being assembled. to the subtle network of accountability being constructed around every lie she had told. Her hubris was tangible, and every day that passed strengthened the inevitability of her collapse. Small, controlled signals hinted at the retribution I had been shaping in silence. Polite remarks, strategically timed inquiries, and carefully orchestrated reactions sent subtle ripples that she failed to notice. The tension was almost imperceptible, yet deliberate, like a taut wire ready to snap. She remained unsuspecting, convinced her dominance was unchallenged, unaware that the undercurrent of my silent planning was drawing nearer to the moment of revelation. Each calculated gesture was a whisper of the storm she could not yet see. Every interaction became a game of mental chess, measured and deliberate. I weighed words, gauged reactions, and anticipated maneuvers, ensuring that each step advanced the ultimate objective without exposing my intentions. The dynamics of trust, deception, and timing were calibrated meticulously, each moment a prelude to a future in which she would be unable to maneuver without walking into my carefully constructed snare. I remained composed, outwardly unaffected, while internally orchestrating a strategy that left nothing to chance. Through it all, a carefully maintained composure masked the storm within. I smiled politely at her boasts, nodded at her insinuations, and feigned ignorance with deliberate precision. Each moment reinforced her sense of security while quietly reinforcing the web of accountability surrounding her. Anger and betrayal simmered beneath the surface, transformed into a controlled, inexorable force. The groundwork had been laid, patience tested and hardened, and the storm that would reshape our lives was poised to break. Silent, precise, and unstoppable. I had always trusted her, always assumed our shared history made us untouchable allies. But as I revisited past conversations, casual remarks that once seemed harmless now clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle. Small inconsistencies in her stories, unexplained absences, and a tone that sometimes carried a subtle edge, all hinted at a deeper betrayal I hadn't noticed before. My mind cataloged everything silently, dissecting each interaction with a meticulous precision. I didn't feel anger yet. I felt focus. Each discrepancy became a clue, and with every detail, the shape of her deception slowly emerged from the shadows of familiarity. As I began tracing the breadcrumbs she had left behind, the picture grew clearer. Bank statements that didn't match shared accounts, digital traces suggesting covert transactions, and subtle verbal slips that betrayed knowledge she shouldn't have possessed, all revealed a pattern. Her manipulations were not random. They were deliberate, carefully orchestrated to gain advantage while leaving me blind to her true intentions. I could almost see the edges of her plan, the careful architecture of lies built over months. The evidence was in plain sight, yet she remained unaware, confident in her ability to deceive without consequence. I realized that the key to dismantling her web lay in her overconfidence. If I could feed it, if I could make her believe her supremacy unchallenged, she would reveal herself further. I began dropping small hints, subtle cues that suggested I was naive, compliant, even vulnerable. In response, she grew bolder, more careless, letting pride and arrogance blind her to the subtle traps being laid. Each feigned ignorance, each quiet nod of acknowledgement was a silent lure, drawing her deeper into the narrative I was constructing with patience and precision. Memories surfaced, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Moments from childhood that had once seemed trivial, but now resonated with clarity. Times when she had subtly undermined me, claimed credit for what wasn't hers, or twisted situations to her advantage. Those flashes of past betrayal fueled a cold determination within me, but they also offered perspective, a reminder that vengeance was not born of impulse alone. It was strategy, patience, and the keen understanding of patterns in human behavior that would ensure success. I allowed these reflections to steel my resolve, understanding fully that I had the moral and emotional clarity to act with precision. Her arrogance became increasingly blatant, a dangerous exhibition of triumph and entitlement. She spoke with a self-satisfaction that suggested invulnerability, flaunted her gains as though they were untouchable, and underestimated the very person she had sought to manipulate. Each boast, each careless display, provided more threads for me to weave into the web of her undoing. Her success, so loudly proclaimed, was ironically the very thing that ensured her vulnerability. I watched with quiet patience, letting her believe she held all the cards while I quietly held the strategy that would turn every advantage against her. With clarity, I began to map a multi-layered plan, one that left nothing to chance. Legal avenues intersected with social influence, financial leverage intertwined with psychological insight, and timing was orchestrated with near-surgical precision. Every potential countermove she might attempt was anticipated, accounted for, and neutralized in advance. The plan was not merely reactive, it was proactive, ensuring that once the first domino fell, the rest would follow inevitably, leaving her with no room to maneuver or escape the consequences of her own hubris. Every element of the plan required careful orchestration. Small, deliberate nudges guided her actions. Carefully timed suggestions made her confident she was in control. I aligned each piece of evidence, every witness, and every digital trace to converge at the exact moment needed. The strategy was invisible to her, seamless in execution and impossible to detect. Every word, every gesture, and every omission had been calculated to ensure that she walked directly into the trap I had laid with months of patience and observation. She moved through her days believing herself untouchable, yet each decision, each careless action only tightened the invisible noose around her. I remained composed, watching, waiting, and letting the structure I had built solidify. Her arrogance blinded her to the subtle shifts in her world, to the way her own behavior reinforced the inevitability of her downfall. The tension grew not with chaos or confrontation, but with the quiet certainty of the trap closing, a precision strike she could neither see nor anticipate. The stage was set, and the moment of reckoning, though unseen, loomed with relentless inevitability. Her confidence had always been her armor, but now it was her undoing. She moved boldly with the stolen money, making decisions as if the world belonged to her alone, ignoring the careful scrutiny of every choice. She believed that a single, audacious gamble could cement her advantage, blind to the fact that each step she took was being recorded, analyzed, and anticipated. Her arrogance became a thread I could pull, a vulnerability so obvious that even the most subtle countermeasure would strike true. She had overreached, and I was ready. I observed with deliberate stillness, a quiet sentinel while the trap solidified around her. Every movement she made, every phone call and whispered plan, was cataloged and matched against my strategy. The setup was flawless, the timing invisible. She remained convinced she was in control, unaware that her confidence had already dictated the terms of her downfall. Patience had allowed me to craft a net so precise that not a single detail could escape, and now I waited for the inevitable to begin, letting her own momentum carry her into the consequences she had not anticipated. Each act of her overconfidence became an opportunity to tighten the hold. A brash comment here, a careless transaction there, and every scheme she attempted against others or me backfired with calculated precision. The elegance of the plan lay in its subtlety. She believed she was winning, yet each decision served only to reinforce the structure of her own undoing. I manipulated outcomes without her knowledge, countering every move with strategic responses that seemed accidental, natural, even benign. But they were far from it. Every misstep became a lever in my hands, tilting the balance of power without alerting her to the shift. Suspense thickened with every passing moment. I noted the tiniest reactions, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a hesitation in her voice, the tension in a handshake. Each subtle error amplified the inevitability of her collapse. The sense of suspense was not created through chaos, but through precision, through watching as her own machinations advanced the plan I had so meticulously constructed. She remained oblivious, yet the pieces had already begun to move independently of her awareness, orchestrated by forces she could neither perceive nor control. And then it came, the misstep that triggered everything. She executed a transaction, signed a document, made a claim that seemed minor, but had been precisely engineered to activate the consequences I had prepared. The shift was instantaneous yet invisible to her. The balance of power snapped in silence, like a quiet fracture in a structure that had seemed unshakable. Every precaution I had taken now revealed its purpose, and her error, born of arrogance, became the catalyst for the collapse she had ignored was coming. I remained composed, savoring the precision of the plan and the inevitability of its effects. There was no triumphal shout, no outward satisfaction, only the internal recognition that months of careful observation and calculation had reached their logical conclusion. The system I had crafted responded exactly as intended, turning her own overreach into the fulcrum of her undoing. Every consequence fell into place, seamless and exact, leaving her unaware until it was too late to adjust, too late to recover. Even as the first signs of imbalance appeared in her world, she maintained the illusion of control. To her, the situation seemed manageable, negotiable, salvageable. Yet every subtle reaction, every miscalculation she made from this point forward only deepened her entrapment. The quiet shift in power was irreversible. Her confidence, once formidable, was now a weakness I exploited indirectly, allowing her to accelerate her own demise while believing herself untouchable. Then, in a single, precise instant, the momentum she had built collapsed under the weight of her arrogance. Decisions that once appeared bold now revealed fatal flaws. Allies she had assumed would remain loyal withdrew. Digital transactions she had presumed hidden triggered alerts, and plans that depended on secrecy unraveled without warning. The collapse was swift, yet it had been silently inevitable. A crescendo of tension resolved through timing and meticulous design. Her fate was sealed, and the balance of power had quietly, irreversibly shifted into my hands. The moment I had been waiting for arrived without fanfare, as silent and precise as the months of preparation that had led to it. With a single set of deliberate actions, accounts were frozen, digital footprints illuminated, and every stolen asset accounted for. Lies that had once seemed carefully concealed unraveled with mechanical precision, revealing the full scope of her deception. Every move she had made, every advantage she thought she held, now worked against her. It was not chaos that marked her downfall, but inevitability. The consequences she had never anticipated cascading into place exactly as I had designed. She froze first, disbelief clouding her face. And then the arrogance that had fueled her actions began to crumble. Every boast, every sly manipulation, every calculated risk she had taken now stood exposed under the weight of evidence. She was caught red-handed, powerless to redirect blame or spin a narrative in her favor. The pride that had once shielded her collapsed instantly, replaced by a raw, unguarded vulnerability. Her hands trembled, her words faltered, and the confidence that had been her armor disintegrated with a cruel swiftness. Panic surged as realization finally struck her. Screams echoed, pleas tumbled from her lips, and frantic gestures attempted to reclaim a control that had already slipped irretrievably away. Every attempt to rewrite the moment, to deflect blame or bargain, was met with the cold certainty of a plan executed flawlessly. She saw too late the trap she had walked into, and the enormity of her misjudgment pressed down with suffocating clarity. For the first time, she understood that she had been outmaneuvered entirely, that her overconfidence had become the instrument of her own undoing. I said nothing, moving with the calm of one who has already won. There was no need for words, no need to gloat. The precision of the strategy spoke for itself, resonating in every halted account, every document that proved her guilt, every whisper of exposure that left her reeling. The revenge was measured, calculated, complete, and it needed no embellishment. Silence carried the weight of triumph, louder than any shout could ever achieve. The aftermath was electric in its intensity, a perfect blend of tension, relief, and satisfaction. Each onlooker, each witness to the unraveling, felt the momentum of justice and the inevitability of her downfall. Her frantic energy contrasted sharply with the calm that had orchestrated it, a reminder that strategy always surpasses impulse. The story of her overreach and the meticulous precision of her exposure left an indelible mark, a narrative of measured, intelligent, and satisfying revenge that resonated far beyond the immediate moment. And yet, amidst the chaos and despair surrounding her, I remained composed, a quiet smile playing at the edges of my resolve. The plan had unfolded exactly as intended. The consequences were irreversible, the justice undeniable. While she struggled against the gravity of her mistakes, I observed with a serene satisfaction, savoring the inevitability that only months of patient, strategic preparation could ensure. In that silence, the final truth rang clear. Revenge had been executed perfectly, and success, the purest victory of all, was mine. The moment the truth settled into the open air, it felt less like a surprise and more like the final piece of a machine clicking into place. Her arrogance, which had once passed for confidence, unraveled into neat, undeniable consequences. Reports arrived, names were called, and the ledger I had built in secret became the kind of proof that demanded attention. Accounts were frozen, contracts voided, and the public record began to reflect what I already knew. She had betrayed more than trust. She had stolen futures. Humiliation followed where secrecy once protected her. Creditors whispered, friends stepped back, and the law, patient and precise, closed the distance she had thought she could outrun. Watching the aftermath, I felt the slow logic of cause and effect settle into rhythm. Every favor she cultivated, every quiet manipulation she used to tilt sympathy toward herself, returned like a boomerang aimed only by her own hand. People she had leaned on now found their voices, and statements she'd once buried surfaced with stubborn clarity. It was neither cruel nor petty that set her fate in motion. It was predictable. Actions have weights, and hers finally balanced the books. In that balance, karma was not a poetic idea, but a visible ledger of choices and returns. With funds reclaimed and legal knots untangled, the practical work of repair began. I guided meetings with bankers and lawyers not to gloat, but to close gaps and restore what had been taken. Small restitutions added up until the financial picture steadied. Apologies reached those she had wronged, and trust, fragile but recoverable, started to mend. Emotional closure arrived not as a sudden balm, but as the quiet satisfaction of righting a wrong with care rather than spectacle. The victory was complete because it required intellect and restraint, not the hollow relief of a shouted insult. Throughout, I remained measured. There was no triumphant parade, no reveling in ruin. I answered questions with calm facts, handed over evidence with steady hands, and let systems designed for fairness do their work. Temper had once come so close to steering me, but restraint redirected that energy into strategy. That steadiness proved more effective than rage. It earned respect and made undoing her schemes inevitable rather than merely possible. Patience and planning had transformed a wound into a repair, and the quiet of that process was its own kind of triumph. As the echoes of her fall faded, a final lesson lingered in the spaces she had occupied. People learned from the way I acted, how firm boundaries and careful proof can outmaneuver bravado and deceit. She, left to survey the wreckage, understood too late that notoriety is not the same as power. The story closed without theatrics. The damage mended where it could be mended, consequences accepted where they could not be avoided, and life resumed with a steadier step. What remained was simple and absolute. Revenge had been served not through spectacle but through restoration, and that silence carried a force that outlasted any shouted victory.